Hello, everyone. Good morning. It's Wednesday. It is the 5th of March somehow. I can't believe we're on the 5th of March this year. The Rangers review morning briefing. Stevie's here again. I'm here. Derek's on his way to Istanbul. Chris is already there. And Stevie and I left at home to pick up the pieces, but we're delighted to be with you. Anyway, Stevie, I'm sure you're not, you share my sentiment. There's not an ounce of jealousy of Chris and Derek being out there in warmer climates today compared to you and I holding fort back home.
It's a bit chilly, wasn't it? This
Yeah.
morning on the old day school run, that's for sure. Just off night shift, I told everybody a big fib.
Oh.
I said on Monday that I wouldn't be back on, but you know yourself, Joshua, you made an emergency substitution to get me back in. So things must be really desperate at Old Rangers Review if you're getting Stevie back in for a second time this week. But alas, here we are.
Yeah, no, not at all. You're my go-to. You're my Barrie Ferguson if I'm Patrick Stewart, but let's not imagine that outcome. Listen, a quick word from our sponsor, Stevie. The Rangers Review is brought to you by S1 Jobs. Delighted to be brought to you by S1 Jobs. If it's time to hand in your transfer requests, some more football chat there, then head over to s1jobs.com. Upload your CV today with thousands of jobs across Glasgow and Edinburgh and the surrounding areas. You'll find the one at S1 Jobs. Start your search today. The relevant links for that are in the description. Right, Stevie. Rangers back in action tomorrow against Fenerbahce. We've not spoken since the latest serving up of an Ibrox afternoon. It was put this in a newsletter the other day. It was put to me by a press colleague on the way out of the game on Saturday that Rangers had sucked the life out of Ibrox. And I thought, how many times could you say that is an accurate reflection of this season? Fenerbahce tomorrow. I mean, just briefly, we're going to talk about sporting directors today. We're going to talk about young players, other things going on, answer some questions. A couple of days on from that Motherwell game, do you hold any optimism about Rangers going to get a result? I mean, Fenerbahce are a team that they actually just snuck into the Europa League playoff. I think they were 24th out of the entire group table, so they finished considerably lower than Rangers, but they also have quite a lot of money and a notable manager and some good players. So how do you? I don't know. What's your gut feeling a day or so before this one?
It's funny because I read that article bit and I read that piece and I said to myself, was that me that said that to you? I couldn't remember because I think we all felt like that, didn't we, as we kind of trooped down on Saturday. What's my gut feeling? My gut feeling is that he has to make changes. Like he said, the ones that are coming back from injury. So you've got Suter, Balogun and Sterling. I think it's an absolute necessity that we try and find game time for them. Unfortunately for them, it's going to be thrown in a wee bit, Joshua, but I don't think we'll get any other option. That centre-back position on Saturday, as well as it has done in previous weeks, has looked alarming. But, you know, the players have to take accountability. Leon Balogun spoke about it. And they owe themselves, never mind anybody else. Look, they've completely let themselves down. They've let the club down. They need to put in a performance. My gut feeling is that, and I'm sorry if this is just covered in all bases, but it could easily be 3-0 to Fenerbahce. And it could easily go there. And on the other hand, it could easily go there and Rangers put in a really good performance and get a score draw or even a result, because you just don't know. You know, your head would tell you that Fenerbahce are very strong favourites, that's for sure. But I don't suppose on this stage you can really write us off. But, you know, James is right. And that's something I alluded to with those players coming back in. That we certainly have to be stronger in the middle. We're so soft centre, giving away silly mistakes. Every goal in the last sort of 6 that we've conceded, Joshua, have all came from individual mistakes or moments. There's no teams that are absolutely, you know, slicing us apart in terms of scoring wonderful goals. That's not a criticism of them, because every goal for them would be wonderful. You know what I mean? I'm just meaning we're contributing to all our own downfall. We have to stop that.
Did you not think that? I've actually not watched the game back from the weekend, which I always do, but I don't know if I've forgotten or this season has just borne me out that in my subconscious I've thought I can't possibly do it again. But did you not think that the middle of the park, which I thought actually looked better away at Kilmarnock, where we spoke about it at the time, it felt as if Rangers weren't shelling the ball forward as much. It felt as if Diamandi and Raskin were closer together. Hadji and Cherney were moving inside. sure, you were maybe helped by Kilmarnock being a bit aggressive and giving you space to play into, that you see for the Desser's run for the 3rd goal and the Desser's layoff for by Rami's 4th goal. But it felt to me as if the team was almost kind of split into 2 parts at the weekend, and it was a kind of 4-4-2 with Hadji moving in field. Hadji and Jeffy just did not work whatsoever on the left-hand side. But it felt to me as if then Raskin and Diomande, once again, we're seeing this outcome that we've seen a lot this season, where it's kind of like Cherney was obviously allowed to stay a little bit higher, and you could see that. But with the 2 strikers, it felt as if, that maybe the defence and the midfield weren't protected. And especially for Motherwell's 2nd goal, although Tavernier gives the ball away poorly, Chefty's caught in a position he shouldn't be, it felt as if the defence was a bit unprotected. Is that fair? Is that maybe just they're at home, they're at Ibrox, they want to start well and they've overcommitted a little bit?
I don't know, because it's difficult. I've said this before, that I don't think the midfield pairing really works. And I'm not sure, I'm not technically minded enough to figure out why that is, but they seem to give up a lot of space, and it's really difficult to take Tynecastle, for example. Because somebody sat on Raskin's space, we were so overloaded in there. And I just think that teams have realised that being physical, Lennon Miller really dominated in there, I thought, unfortunately for us. And the difference in stature with him with our midfielders is quite vast. So that was a problem for me. I think Jim's right when he says we're not physical and we don't win. And see, when so many components, Joshua, are off it, like you said, left back, I thought Hadji was really, really poor. Cherney on the other side is Cherney's done in terms of physically. I think he's absolutely exhausted.
Yeah.
And I really feel sorry for him, because he's one that I look at and I look that he's trying to do the passes, he's trying these things, but he's just not getting there. And then when you look at other components where you think about Eagleman's not sparking at this moment in time, there's all little bits that come into play, and the lack of confidence, and we're just completely soft-centred. So all these things need to change. I think that he needs to think about a change of formation, I think, or system, because this, I look, something we'll talk about is something that you said in your article yesterday about the sport director, which is really good. But it was a frustration to me that Barrie reverted back to things that just have never worked all season. And I don't want to come on and pin the blame on people, because that's unfair. It's a collective. But stop going back to the guys that we know aren't going to be part of the club in the future. And stop trying the same things that Philippe Clement tried, that I sat here for 7-8 months and totally, tore strips off him for. Barry's no different. And yes, Barry's only been in a week, and I completely get it. He's had a couple hours on the training, but I'd like to see him get these players back and think about doing something different. All of us could accept outcomes if we're at least not repeating the same thing that other people have done and failed in. So it all comes down to the players, obviously, for me, Joshua, but it brings me on, I think, to the conversation you had about the sporting director stuff, certainly. So, which was a really good article yesterday, may I add.
Well, thank you, my colleague. Well, I was going to pick you up on what you said there, because if people haven't read it, there's a in-depth piece on why Rangers have performed this U-turn, why they're going back to a sporting director model, and it's something that, in the context of the last few weeks, with small matter of this takeover, Philippe Clement getting sacked, Barrie Ferguson returning, it's kind of went under the surface, but it's a pretty big announcement. It was put to me by one person that Rangers have paid a consultancy firm to come and tell them to re-implement a model that they had for 5 or 6 years. Patrick Stewart obviously has not been in the building. He's picking up the pieces. We can debate how well he played, the Philippe Clement backing. That's maybe a conversation for another day. But Stevie, I thought there was a couple of things that stood out to me for the weekend. It did feel like when the league season was over, the one thing that probably, we maybe said quite consistently is you just got to play young players between now and the end of the season. Bailey Rice is out of contract in 2026. That is a year come the summer. You've got to demonstrate that there's a pathway, because there's no shortage of teams who would like him to play football for them too. As much as you'd imagine that he'd like to stay at Rangers, he will want to play football. It's not exactly been a smooth ride for him over the last year or so, has it? Finlay Curtis has signed this new deal. We've hardly seen him since. you had Paul and Seal come on in place of Tom Lawrence at home against USG, I think it was, for the final 10 minutes, came on against Dundee United away. And it felt like Clement was starting to, I guess, really subscribe and buy in to developing a younger squad. And behind the scenes, again, multiple people certainly felt that that was starting to happen. When the results started to dip, you can maybe understand this to a degree, but you have the outcome where Ridvan comes on at left wing instead of Curtis against Queen's Park, and Bailey Rice is the one that's hooked at half-time, and then Seal's not seen in the squads, and all these kind of trickle of knock-on effects start to happen. My slight concern, Stevie, and this is why I think you need a sporting director, is that Rangers have constantly pivoted to their manager, as a silver bullet, whether it be Beelan in terms of recruitment, Clement in terms of kind of being a football figurehead and being given more and more time and surviving results that Rangers managers don't, and Rangers managers probably should not. Before we get on to sporting director, is that a concern for you before now and the end of the season, that maybe we do see too much of the likes of Tom Lawrence, who he's out of contract in the summer, so you'll look at that from a a decision-making point of view. Is that wise when you have these young players to develop? Now, no, Bailey Rice isn't a number 10, but you may be looking at NCO or changing the midfield shape slightly and getting Rice in there. The centre-back situation too. I think Nsiala has shown he'll be a good player. Has a lot of potential. He's had a couple of bumps in the road. That was always going to happen. And it was always going to happen when, again, as we've discussed, Stevie, young players come in, and because of where Rangers are, they need to be leaders straight away, as opposed to, being led for a bit. I don't think Proper is necessarily bailed Nsiala out when he's needed it in the last couple of weeks. But then you don't have Nsiala and Fernandez in the squad. And again, you have Balogun, who's out of contract in the summer, Proper, who's a short-term signing. I know I'm going round in circles, but is that a bit of a concern for you, that we see too much of that short-termism between now and the end of the season, which you can understand from Barry Ferguson's point of view? He wants to win games. His reputation is on the line, and he's the one in the dugout. But that's why I think you need someone alongside that from a sporting point of view who says, hold on, what's the long-term value of this decision?
I think, look, what I would say is I can completely understand, as much as I'm frustrated, and I did say that at the top, I can completely understand Barry's point of view. He's also, not been with them for longer than, I think he said, 2 hours on the training pitch prior to Monday.
Yeah.
So I completely get it. But would I prefer, and it's not only Tom Lawrence, and we kind of signal him out a bit. We know that, or it's most likely that he's going. You never know with this football club, but it would appear likely. Yanis Hadji's in there as well, and Yanis Hadji had an upturn in kind of form-ish around Christmas time, but hasn't done anything now for a considerable number of games. If he's not staying and that's affecting him, there was suggestions that he's turned down his last contract and things. If that's the case, then we have to think a wee bit longer term that, Yanis Hadji come off at half-time on Saturday. That, the logical thing for me would have been to go and put on Finlay Curtis and understand that he maybe feels that he can't throw them in that position, but as the season closes, there's nothing left to play for. And I'm not suggesting that we throw in Bailey Rice or Finlay Curtis and we go to Parkhead, which is going to be a really, really difficult afternoon. But thinking long-term strategy after that, when there isn't a lot to do, then I would agree with you that we need to start trying not only to see if, they have something, because there's a lot of promise around them. We need to see, it's not a sink or swim, but it almost is in many ways for them to see if they can survive in that kind of environment. But I would hope that, with the return of that trio that I spoke about, Suter, Balogun and Sterling, hopefully, he goes on a run, and, we've said that so many times, and I would hope that, but it's interesting you talk about the sporting director thing, George, where perhaps, I would ask you, why is it so pivotal that role is there then, and why did we come away from it in the first place if it's so pivotal to everything, and what difference would that make at this really moment in time? Do you think he would more be a figurehead to kind of direct Barry Ferguson and say, look, I understand the position, but these guys have to get game time no matter what? Is that kind of what you're advocating for? And, where do we think we'll go? Because we've heard a few suggestions that it could be, the likes of Claudio Reyna, it could be Carlos Bocanegra. Are these lazy suggestions just because of the kind of 49ers angle, or what kind of, can we look at it in a broader terms and get you to kind of, because you're educating me as well, I must admit.
No, both goes both ways. I mean, the speak to people about what's happening at Rangers at the moment. It's most likely, and the plan is to get a sporting director in place, to get a manager in place. The reason the sporting director is most important, I think you just need to look, and Patrick Stewart said this in his Rangers TV interview, Stevie, look at all European clubs kind of just like everywhere, and they employ this model. The most basic summary is it's almost like an off-pitch manager. It's someone that's there longer than the manager, that deals with the larger aspects of a job the manager does not have time to anymore because the roles change so much. And Rangers have effectively operated without someone at the top of the football tree, aside from the manager, with real football nous. So I'd say with Clement, Stevie, it was pretty obvious for a number of weeks, months, that things were not getting better. And that's not from a biased view of, it's not necessarily from a biased view from my behalf, but if you looked at the underlying numbers, if you looked at even things like the Queen's Park game when Clement referenced a lot of shots, the reason a sporting director is in place is because a CEO probably doesn't have it's unlikely unless they come from a kind of sporting background, they have the tools to properly judge when a manager is over or underperforming, when it's right to give them more time, or when that time is futile. Rangers moved away from that to this football board, wasn't in place for very long. Only 2 of those original members remain in the club. It was a CEO at the top of that, former CEO James Bisgrove. But consistently what you've had throughout the last number of years, I think it's 10 years tomorrow since regime change, Stevie, and Chris has a piece on the website about that today. You've always had a chairman, a shareholder, as a shareholder, someone with real ties to the club who's effectively at the top making the decisions. Patrick Stewart coming in as the CEO and Fraser Thornton as an external chairman is a change in that regard, because it means that there's a bit of distance as to who is running the club, and that just had to happen because of the decisions, I think, made to get Rangers here. So Rangers, when they came away from their sporting director model, spoke a lot about recruitment. We want to get recruitment right. We don't want to have an overarching sporting director. But I'd argue, instead of maybe restructuring the recruitment department a little bit or refining it, it kind of tore the whole thing up. And now they're going back to build it again. So, Niels Coppen had that promotion to become technical director, but that doesn't put him at the top of the football tree. Maybe gives him a little bit more influence over certain departments. We saw that with academy changes, Stevie. Perhaps it links to things behind the scenes more. We can talk about recruitment maybe before the end of the show. But when you've not got someone who's the kind of football and continuity figure instead, as opposed to the manager, everything flows from him. And that's where you get into a difficult situation, because what Michael Beale wants to do football-wise is totally different from what Philippe Clement wants to do. And I put it in the piece, but Rangers have been a team and a club kind of catching up with their own ideas. Just give us a few months to sort the injury situation out. Give us a few months to get the squad suited to the manager. Give us a few months to get squad depth. And that's because they've not had this overarching figure who's not, again, he's not a silver bullet, a sporting director, but it's a logical thing that makes sense. So that, in a roundabout way, I think describes an expensive mistake that has put Rangers back. Will getting a sporting director solve absolutely everything? But no, but it gives you a better chance of success. And just from a basic point of view, Stevie, you need someone who knows football, judging the manager's performance. And for a long time, I think under Clement, Rangers did not have that. I don't know if that very roundabout way answers your query, but that's how I'd.
It does.
And Tom Scott's in there. Did Souness have a sporting director? No, it was also the 1980s, and football has changed a little bit since then. It's changed totally since then. So Stewart said that in his interview, didn't he? Rangers are an outlier in regards to European football and not having a sporting director, and that is probably the best answer as to why they're, again, going back to this model that they've spent time moving away from.
Can I ask you then something? What sort of name do you expect to come in? I'm not asking for a specific, but what kind of frustrates me, and it might be the same for others, I don't know, that we seem to put people into top ranking positions within the club that maybe aren't qualified yet, or it's like we need to build them into this role. Maybe a role like this, we should be putting in somebody that's actually experienced with a good history of it, an actual sporting director, for example, instead of, and I don't mean this disrespectfully, but Niels Coppen ended up with a really high-ranking job when he was coming from scouting at PSV. And I'm not suggesting we put him in a position too quickly. What I'm saying to you is, do we need to go for an actual sporting director with experience to go straight into that position and lead the club from there? And then you could get somebody to follow him or even train Neil's copping up or whatever. That's fine, understand that. But do we have to go for an experienced figure? Because that's maybe been a frustration of before, when, for me personally, when we seem to be putting people in and we have to buy into it. Do you understand? We shouldn't have to buy into a position like that a wee bit. So what I'm asking you is, do you think with the new owners that philosophy might change a wee bit if indeed the new owners, etc., does, all hypothetical, etc.?
I think if you go back, Stevie, to like look at the changes that happened in the club in 2023, so you had John Bennett step up from vice chairman to chairman. James Bisgrove was commercial director to CEO. Michael Beale wasn't assistant at the time, but he had been assistant first team coach, stepped up to manager. Zeb Jacobs. There was this real culture of internal promotion, and we're going to let the younger guys do it now. New ideas. All that was directed though from there not being regime change. So when this regime change does happen, will there be a dramatically different way of doing business? Dramatic is maybe too strong, but you'd think so. Rangers are not being bought into to make a loss, Stevie. They're being bought into because they are seen, and this is probably, again, the best description. They're being bought into because they're seen as a club who are underperforming their value and who there's a lot more to get out of. So I totally agree with you. I think first and foremost, still, the need for an experienced sporting director will be paramount, because if anyone knows how to run sporting institutions to make profit, it is probably going to be people like the 49ers, Enterprises, all the individuals that come under that bracket. On the topic of Coppin, as I understand it, it was a bit of a redirecting, rebalancing of the role that he initially walked into or initially signed up to. So I'll give you an example, Stevie. As I understand it, towards the end of his time at PSV, he was effectively assisting the sporting director to do with squad planning, contracts. He'd moved into that role after being a scout responsible for South America at one point, and a senior scout in the PSV setup. But again, as I understand it, that did not translate to contract negotiations last year, right? So you might say, what does that matter? He's there to sign new players. And it also didn't attribute to influence over the academy. But how can you be in charge of squad planning, as, again, Patrick Stewart spoke about recently, when you're not in charge of who stays? And if the manager has more of a say over that than you, then that is particularly a difficult situation you get into. And also how the academy is structured, who's coming up, whether they're going on loan, this B team system that we've spoken about to death. So it was described to me as more of a realigning, is probably the phrase of the job that Coppin was kind of already doing. But to make that work, to make something like recruitment work, you need things to be linked up behind the scenes. Do Rangers still need an experienced figure at the top, behind the scenes, at the training ground, at the stadium, above the manager, sitting alongside the manager? Absolutely. I don't know if that answers your question, Stevie, but that's how I would see it. We should get some comments, because people will say we're not doing so. Comment here saying, Barrie said he's not just going to fling youth in for the sake of it. They need to show something. Chris saying Barrie has inherited a poison chalice. If he plays the young players, we suffer a heavy defeat. The fans will slaughter him. There's no goodwill in the bank for this team right now. That's a fair point. Haggis Killer, great name. I would go 4-3-3 with Rice, Raskin, and Sterling in the middle. Shape change, Stevie. Moving away from the sporting director conversation, is it going to happen?
Yeah. Well, I think it maybe should happen. That's what I was hinting at the start. I mean, it can be subtly done, but I think that he has tried, doesn't he? He went for 4-4-2 and then went back to the kind of 4-2, kind of set up after that. And it's not. I don't think it necessarily works for me, the 4-2-3-1. But if you're going to change it, I mean, all the comments are right. I would say that, right. I understand completely. It's and I kind of hinted on it myself. It's getting the balance of it right. I don't think if we go to a 3 in the middle like that, I take Diamandi out of the team, because although Diamandi is a frustrating figure, he's the one that breaks lines and he's the one that really closes down and everything else for me. What we should be doing is trying to complement his game. And if he's left side of a three and that, I think that might suit him a bit better. So who can we put around him? And that's only my kind of opinion on that. So would I go to a three? Interestingly, yeah, but I wouldn't necessarily be first on to say that he should come out of it. So you need to get the balance right, because I don't think Raskin and Diamande is working because of the style of player they are, and I don't think they complement each other the best. So we need to get back to how did we complement them? Could Barron come back in there and really show it up next to Raskin while Diamande's then allowed to go box to box and play a wee bit more, as well as being disciplined? He could sit in the left, Raskin goes right, Barron sits. Would that kind of work? Would Sterling go in there? So I do think that, could you just say, right, Bailey Rice, you're getting the rest of the season and you will sit in as your six, but then he has to show as well. So I'm not against change in that way, Joshua. But, I think that we have to find a way that complements the style of play, which I don't know quite how it happened. Was it because Kilmarnock were so open? But I thought Diamande looked really bright at Rugby Park, and he was key to a lot of the things that we did. So maybe that's wrong completely. I don't mind if it is.
No,
But
no,
I just think we should try and
I don't think it
complement.
is.
I think we should try and complement the better players that we have, and we don't have many. But I think that he is one. So how do we get him playing the best? And
I would
that's where
say.
I am.
Sorry, Stevie. I would say that first half against Motherwell was just like a Motherwell pressed pretty well. They've obviously got this new manager who's just come in, and you could see, I think, some change in how aggressive they were. But Rangers looked like a team who couldn't play out through pressure and keep the ball after one or two training sessions, because they've not done that all season. And you could see that with the back four holding the ball. Before you talk about anything specific in terms of individuals, I'd say that this is a team. I was going to mention it when you talked about Václav Černý earlier. Černy's numbers, I'm not sure what he's on. He's well over 20 goals and assists. He's done his part, right? He has kept up his side of the bargain. I think he was a really good short-term loan signing. The issue for me, Stevie, is players around him. And where I do subscribe to what Barry Ferguson will probably try to do and trying to get Balogun and Suter and especially Sterling back in there, is the team that started at the weekend, arguably the team that played at Rugby Park, just really lacks physical profiles. One or two or three to raise the levels around you. If you've got Sterling, let's say hypothetically, you've got Sterling at right back who can overlap Černý, I think suddenly that improves him. If you've got a more physical centre back next to Nsiala when he's having those two difficult games, Stevie, then I think he can cover him a little bit more instead of Proper, who just needs to worry about not being exposed himself to long balls. If you've got two physical centre backs who can cover space, then suddenly the midfield is maybe a little bit more trusting, can push up a little bit higher. So as we kind of wrap up, that's where I'm in agreement with you saying, and probably this balance that Barry Ferguson has to strike, because that when you're missing a certain number of players, as Rangers have been, John Sterling's just come back from a fractured shin, which is why he'd missed those previous 2 months after taking a knock against Hibs. They are a team that need a couple more of those profiles in any game, but in particular these next 3 games, which is what Fenerbahce twice and then going away to face Celtic at Parkhead.
Yeah, I don't disagree. It's going to be what I suppose my overriding feeling on this is that as long as Barry changes it and tries to do something, I think there's big question marks. I've said it for a few weeks now. I think Jeff Day is struggling at left back, so you need to look at that. And even if your solution is Ridvan, who arguably hasn't really been great since, ironically, he played at right back against Maeda at New Year when I thought he had a really good and strong game. You need to maybe think about taking him out of there just because of, he's not providing enough numbers and things like that. You said an interesting thing at Sterling at right back. So does that mean you would take James Tavernier out of there completely?
No, not necessarily. I'm just thinking more in terms of I think if you had Černý as he is just now, and you had Tavernier 3-4 years ago with the legs to really get up and down and go and overlap him, I think that would have worked really well. But neither of those players are really running away from anyone anymore, and Sterling probably has the ability to do that. We also saw Tavernier obviously in the centre. Does that continue? Maybe not. I don't know at this stage. but it just needs a couple of physical profiles in that team, Stevie. So we'll see. I agree with you on Chefty, but again, Chefty's 21, right?
Yeah, no, I should be clear. It's not a criticism of him. More an observation of recent form.
Yeah, and an observation, Stevie, I think, of the overall context. The same as Igaman, who comes in as this brilliant run. I think at times has played a deeper role to the detriment of himself, but maybe to help the team overall. He plays better with Danilo up front. Danilo's been injured. But Jeffy is a perfect example of, see if he'd come into a team that was playing pretty well and he'd played 25 games this season. And it was only a month or so ago that this news broke of Chelsea expressing interest. The thing is with young players, it's going to be up and down. But if you abandon the plan when it's down, and I'm not saying that they are with Nsiala, Barry Ferguson. I thought actually Nsiala and Ferguson dealt with that pretty well on the night and after the game in the following press conference. But if you don't stick with that plan, Stevie, then it's not going to work, you know? And that Jeffy for me is a perfect example of someone who has had to come in and be. He must have played maybe the most minutes in the Scottish Premiership for an outfield player. He'd certainly be up there. And he's also not been able to have a rest because of Ridvan's injuries and Ridvan playing at right back. I have a feeling they might play Ridvan somewhere because he's going back to see an old rival, isn't he, in Fenerbahce? So, yeah, it's going to be interesting. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, the interest is always there, isn't it? It's just it's a par for the course with transfer windows. But listen, we'll leave it there. Good to chat as always to you, Stevie, and thanks to everyone for joining us. Reminder, you can subscribe to the Rangers Review at the moment for £1 for 6 months. Subscribe for free if you can on YouTube. Really helps us out if you watch every day, and do like the video. Aside from that, we'll speak to you later. Chris is out in Istanbul, of course, and he will be joining us after Jose Mourinho's press conference, probably about 12:30 UK time. So keep your notifications on, and we'll be live with a post-presser briefing to see what Jose had to say about facing Rangers and bring you up to date with everything else from the camp out in Turkey, which arrives later tonight. But until then, thanks for watching. We'll speak to you soon, and bye for now.